She-Hulk, Episode 2, Revenge of the Dramedy. Now first I want to start off by saying that this episode was a little bit better and I did enjoy it a little bit more than the first episode, but there was still some problems, and even though I would technically score it higher than the previous episode, it still falls kind of low. And once again, this will be a spoiler review, so if you don't want this episode to be spoiled, turn off the video, turn off your phone, shut down your computer, do whatever you have to avoid having this spoiled if you don't want to have it spoiled. Now in the intro, I did poke fun at it a little bit for being more of a dramedy because this episode really doesn't have very much action. The only action happens very near the end of the episode, and it's only for a very, very short time. So as She-Hulk goes through this, or Jen Walters or whoever, she doesn't do a whole lot as far as being She-Hulk and breaking things or fighting someone. So in that respect, it is sort of a dramedy, and it's about kind of her movement into this new job position that she gets, which I'll explain in a minute. But she moves into this new job, and it's really just following her during that time. So in that sense, that kind of sucks because we don't get that sort of show of strength and feats as She-Hulk, Jen Walters as She-Hulk, because while she is in She-Hulk form a little bit, she doesn't do anything. She doesn't fight anyone, and that makes it for a much slower episode. So at the very beginning of the episode, we have a slight recap that Jen does for the audience, and all it does is go over the first episode and kind of the events that led up to the right now. Now, the inclusion of a recap really feels like an outdated mode of storytelling because modern day, with all these episodes on a streaming service, there's not really any need or point to a recap, and that just made it feel a little bit strange because back in the 90s, at the height of my TV experience as a child, you needed a recap because you watched public television. And watching public television, you couldn't go back and rewatch an episode until reruns came on much later. And then you only got to see one episode per week. And as I said, you don't really need a recap nowadays because you have streaming services. You can go back and rewatch it. I guess it's good for the lazy who don't want to kind of go back and rewatch the first episode or even fast forward through it, which seems like a really easy, simple answer to this problem. But it's in there and it feels strange. And personally, I think it doesn't feel right. Now, as I mentioned before, the episode starts out with Jen losing her job, and that is because she saved the jury from the flying bench that Titania threw, and that creates a bias amongst the jury members, and therefore the opposing attorney is able to get the case thrown out because it supposedly creates this bias among the jury members, and therefore they can't have a fair trial. And so then Jen is fired from her position at the law firm. And Jen is then given a job at this opposing law firm because they liked her work and thought that she built a good case against them. So they hire her. Come to find out, this law firm wants her to be a face of a new division for representing superhumans. And the first superhuman that she is supposed to represent, the first case that she's supposed to take, is for parole for Emil Blonsky, who is the Abomination. And naturally, Jen has some conflict with this because Abomination tried to kill Hulk, her cousin. And just a really quick cut in here, I realized that I said Abomination tried to kill Hulk, but canonically they are enemies, and Hulk and Abomination have fought all throughout comic book history as well as cartoon history of the Hulk stories. So before Jen even agrees to take this case, she has to go talk to Blonsky and kind of interview him and see what's going on, because if she doesn't take this case, she's then fired from her job. And so she goes to visit Blonsky, or the Abomination, in a super high security prison for superhumans. So she gets there, and come to find out, Emil Blonsky is played by Tim Roth. And if you don't know, Tim Roth played Blonsky in the Edward Norton film, which is really kind of interesting and a nice wink to that film. So as they're talking, Emil Blonsky tries to convince Jin that he is reformed and he's doing all these things to make amends to the people that he's hurt. He's even written haikus, kind of expressing that, which is a little bit strange, but it works. It's funny. It's kind of interesting. So at this point, after her interview with Emil Blonsky, she then goes home. She's thinking about it. Then she calls up Bruce Banner and talks to him about it and basically tries to convince him to be okay with letting her take the case. And come to find out, Hulk even received one of these haikus in a letter from Blonsky, and he feels like they've kind of buried their hatchet, and is perfectly fine letting Jin take the case. And even to further the wink to the Edward Norton film, he says something about not even being the same person, which is hilarious because in that movie, Hulk was played by Edward Norton and not Mark Ruffalo. So then the episode ends by Jen calling her boss and telling him that she's agreeing to take the case and will represent the Abomination. And that conversation ends with her boss telling her to look at the news. And she turns on her TV and finds that Abomination has escaped. Now, the whole point of her representing Abomination was to get him out on parole. And come to find out, he escaped and is fighting in an underground fight club. And the last line is Jen looking at the camera and saying, "Oh crap," or something to that effect. So once again, that breaking of the fourth wall and talking to the camera does come into play a little bit at the end and a little bit, I think, in the middle of the episode. And again, it still feels weird. It's just strange and it's not consistent kind of throughout the episode. So it's just at times where the writers thought it would be funny or something, but it never comes across as funny. Now, all that to say that I did enjoy this episode, like I said, a little bit better than the first. I would rate it a tad higher than the first because there were some genuinely funny moments that I did laugh out loud and not ironically, like I did at Titania's Kung Fu kick. So I did kind of enjoy it. It was kind of funny. There were some interesting moments, and the wink to the Edward Norton Hulk film was really interesting and kind of fun to watch. But then at the same time, you have things like Titania being referenced as a superpowered influencer, which is just strange to me because why in the world would you have a supervillain being an influencer on social media? Like, why is that a thing? Why do we need an influence? What they're just at this point, the writers are just trying to be hip and cool and reference modern culture, which just is so cringy and it just feels gross because it doesn't fit the comic book milieu, and it's just comes across as strange, and I wish they would stop that. So there it is. Really not much more to say. It was an okay episode, a little bit better than the first one, but I'm probably not going to watch any more or do any more reviews on this series unless something really catches my eye or catches my attention that I feel like is worth talking about. So I do hope you enjoyed this review, and please like and subscribe. I am going to get back to some of my other author content because I want that to be the main focus of my channel still. But once in a while, I will do reviews like this, and I will probably be doing a review on The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power as well. At least the first episode, maybe the second as well. And I will see you in the next one.